Hello everyone, you're on an all-new episode of The Final Cut, and today I'm going to be going over John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars from 2001. Here we go. Ghost of Mars is directed by John Carpenter, stars Natasha Henstridge, Ice Cube, Pam Grier, Jason Statham, Clea Duvall, Joanne Cassidy, and Peter Jason. So Ghost of Mars is set 200 years in the future in 2176, and Natasha Henstridge, Pam Grier, Jason Statham, Clea Duvall, they're part of an intergalactic police unit, and they get sent to Mars to pretty much detain a fugitive being kept there named Desolation Williams, played by Ice Cube. Upon going there, they figure out that this colony on Mars has been murdered, nobody's in sight, and they suspect it's Desolation Williams, and Ice Cube's just like, no, it's somebody else. And it's these crazy cannibalistic people. It's ghosts. You find out ghosts have possessed these individuals in the colony, and they used to be the original inhabitants of Mars. So it's a very crazy movie. If you're a fan of films like Assault on Precinct 13, along with Resident Evil and Night of the Living Dead, you might really like this film. It's a very different film. It's a science fiction horror film. And John Carpenter did this in 2001. It's one of his last movies. He felt burnt out after making this. But it's not a bad movie on its own right. There's a lot of critics bashing this film. A lot of people, it doesn't measure up to earlier John Carpenter films, but it's, in fact, I feel, misunderstood. It's a very excellent film, and much like other John Carpenter films, over time it ages like a fine wine. There's no other film quite like this. Now, even though some of the special effects look a bit dated, it still has that very early 2000s feel to it. Also, John Carpenter has Steve Vai Buckethead. He did the score with them and other artists, and it has a very heavy metal sound. Fight Train and Kick-Ass are two well-known tracks. As a matter of fact, the soundtrack is probably better than the movie itself. But other than that, I like Ice Cube's role. He's very different from the other ones, compared to Natasha Henstridge as a police and criminal. And I like his attitude. I like it where it's just oh, what about Plan B? It's just Plan B, what we should have done in the first place. Come on, you mother effers. And he starts shooting them. Such a fantastic moment. I like the roles and dialogue between Natasha Henstridge and him, how they play off of one another. Pam Grier has a great role. Very, very minor role, though. She has a very brief role. We also get Jason Statham in a very early role of his when he still had hair. It's around the time he did The One. Clea Duvall, she was in previously films like The Faculty. We get to see her here. And there's a lot of other people who have been in John Carpenter films, and I like the cast. It's a very, very isolated film on Mars. They filmed it in New Mexico, and it was mostly at night. They had to make it look like they were actually on Mars. So it is in real sets and stuff. There is some computerization, very early computerization that has aged quite a bit, but with the real sets and everything, and the story is quite interesting. The beginning is like your usual horror movie where they go to a town and investigate, hey, there's something off with this town that's not supposed to be like this. And yeah, it definitely has that element going for it, but it's great. I love everything about this movie. It starts there, and the beginning is a bit slow until you find a person who is basically kind of like an archaeologist there. They unopen this tomb that basically let out these spirits that possess the individuals, the colonists, and it's Ghost of Mars. It's pretty much the original inhabitants of Mars taking over, and they're like these cannibalistic tribal people who are just brutal. They just kill anything that is not one of them. So the whole movie is pretty much the police unit with Desolation Williams fighting together to get out of this place. And the movie does follow certain tropes of the horror genre of this kind. And there is certain moments where you think you know where it's going to go, and it just completely takes a 180 and just goes a completely different direction. Just when you think it's over, it's not over. And of course, it ends with a great cliffhanger, much like Big Trouble in Little China or other John Carpenter films. Some way, I wish it had a sequel, but by itself as a film, it's not bad. It's very rare to have the action and science fiction within a horror movie, and it's a very different John Carpenter movie. All of his movies are different from one another, yet have that John Carpenter flavor. I would probably give the film a 3.5 out of 5 and a B+. Ghost of Mars definitely makes the final cut. Is it John Carpenter's best? No, but it is a very enjoyable movie, and I think it's among one of his most memorable. The soundtrack is amazing. Steve Vai from the freaking Crossroads movie with Ralph Macchio. The guitar duel, Steve Vai, and then you have Buckethead, and then John Carpenter adding his musical talent to the score with those other artists creates an awesome score. Listen to the soundtrack and play a Resident Evil game, seriously. But the performances, they're all pretty solid performances. And originally, Courtney Love was supposed to be the main character, and Natasha Hendricks got added in last minute. It's probably one of the most hardest film experiences she had, just going in there and then just the physicality of it all. She does an amazing job. I liked her work in the Species films, so this was a really good role for her, very different. And again, I like how she played off of Ice Cube. Jason Statham in a very early type of action role for him. A little bit of a taste of what you'll see in his future films. Pam Grier, I liked her role here, very brief, much like Escape from LA, and everybody else does a fantastic job. They pretty much play their parts in this scenario of a horror film. So yeah, a 3.5 out of 5 and a B+. If you have not seen Ghost of Mars, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a John Carpenter fan. It's a very different film from his, and it again has that early 2000s feel to it. Sci-fi horror film vibe. But the cinematography I love. The effects are a bit dated. It does feel a little bit like late 70s, early 80s, but something's very timeless about that. And it does have that vibe of the early 2000s as far as like the future and how everything is perceived. Ice Cube, it's not one of his personal favorite performances, but it's one of my favorite performances of Ice Cube. I like him in this role. He's just a badass, take no shit type of person. And everybody else is great. And the score is amazing. John Carpenter did a great job. I like the villains. I like the look of the antagonist in this as of the Ghost of Mars. And that whole story is very original and interesting about like people living on Mars before and being trapped and then unleashed to basically wreak havoc on its new colonists. That's very, very different. Ghost of Mars makes the final cut, and if you have seen Ghost of Mars, let me know in the comments below what did you think of the film. And if you like this video, click the like button and subscribe for more videos. Stay tuned for October because on Halloween season, we're going to be having a lot more of the final cut.